Living in New York, as I do, with so many people doing so many things in such close proximity, there's juxtapositions that are possible and that occur that you'd never imagine, and it just things happen regularly. In New York, it's like life is dealing you an extra hand every now and then that you can't anticipate it, and it just happens. One day I'm on the subway going to a meeting uptown, and it's the train that goes up the west side of Manhattan. And I get on the train. I'm not one of those people with the earbuds in, zoning out, or I'm not reading on my device or immersed in a newspaper. I'm kind of vigilant, and I scan the car and I, check the exits and see if there's anybody with an axe or anything, and see who's paying attention, who's not. And I get on the subway car one day and I see a college-age couple, a guy and a girl. She's got her leg draped over his knee, and they're kind of nestled together, and they have this thing that they're handing back and forth, and it's got laces on it, and they're tying these knots. And they're doing it with one hand, doing it with the other hand. They're untying it. He gives it to her. And I've never seen anything like this. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, is it a game? It looked like almost like a magic trick with the dexterity that they had. And I figured that they're not harmful. I'll just put them there. And the next stop, a guy gets on, and he's got this visiting professor look. He's got the shoulder bag, the tweed jacket with the patches on the elbows. He's got the laptop, and he's got the file folder box. And he gets on, and he puts everything down. And he looks, and he sees the kids. And I watch him, and they don't see him, and he just kind of darts over there, drops to his knees in front of them, and he says, "Oh, wait, look, this is how you have to do it." And he says to them, when you're doing this, all the information's going to be coming at you at the same time, and it's going to be slippery, and you can't see your fingers. And it turns out he is a visiting lecturer giving the medical school at Columbia a lecture on the latest suturing techniques. And these are med school students practicing suturing on the train to hear his lecture. So as he's giving them tips in person on this little board that they've got, when he said it's going to be slippery and there's going to be so much depending on what you're doing, I was just catapulted out of the train car from that night into a prior morning, when I woke up, and it wasn't even really like waking up. It was more like breaking through the ice into a frozen lake of pain. I was just completely drenched in the most all-consuming pain that I had ever imagined. I wasn't wearing any of my own clothes, and I wasn't in my own bed. And the only part of my entire body that didn't hurt was my instep. And at the foot of the bed, I opened my eyes, and there's the surgeon who has spent all night saving my life, squeezing and rubbing on my instep. And I have a tube up my nose to drain my stomach. I've got 2 tubes coming out of either side of my chest. I have a morphine drip, a catheter, and I just am trying to focus on where I am and what's going on. Next to the surgeon are 2 homicide detectives from the NYPD. Now, when your day starts with 2 homicide detectives explaining what happened to you the night before, it's going to be downhill from there. It turns out that the evening before, some gang members had come into Manhattan from Brooklyn. As part of an initiation, 3 of these young men had to kill somebody to move up in the gang. They had a lookout stationed at either end of the block, and these 3 guys sat on a stoop in the middle of the block with their knives out up their arm like that, just waiting. And a young man comes around the corner. It's all clear. It's late at night, about 2 a.m. The lookouts give the go-ahead. The guys stand up, start walking toward him. He has his key out, puts his key in the door to the lobby of his building. He goes in, the door closes behind him. He pushes the elevator button. The kids are locked out. looking at him get onto the elevator. He goes up, takes his clothes off, goes to sleep. Never knows what just didn't hit him. I'm the next guy. The lookouts give the go-ahead. This is a few minutes later. 3 guys get up. They come walking toward me. I'm thinking my own thoughts, walking down the street. I see 3 kids coming. I have a sense that I don't want to walk through them, so I kind of step to the side. They get up to me and pounce and begin stabbing me as many times as they can. The guy to my right had a knife with a 10-inch blade. The first thing he did was go for my side. Now, one of the very lucky things among many that night is that when I was at university, I was at Notre Dame, I was on the boxing team. So as soon as they pounced, I put my hands up, which meant that the knife went in under my elbow, up at an angle, through everything on its way to my vena cava, which it cut. He then pulled it out and went for my throat, but because my hands were up, it went into my neck here, down, collapsed this lung. The guy on this side was going like a sewing machine, in and out up my back with a blade, a 6-inch blade on that knife. And the guy in the middle couldn't quite find a place to stab, so he was just standing there, and I just hit him one really good straight right punch and knocked him out, which gave me a chance to start running. As I ran down the block, they're grabbing him to drag him away. My collapsing lungs are filling up with blood. I go down to my hands and knees. I start to crawl. There's a restaurant down the block. I started to scream, actually, as I was running, so the screams brought out the waitresses. And these kids are bundling this, their buddy off that way, and the waitresses come out, and I tell them I've just been stabbed. Now, this being New York City, of course, a garbage truck pulls up, and guys jump off the truck to try and get the garbage bags. And it turns out one of them is a Vietnam vet, and the girls start screaming. They're like, this guy just got stabbed. He comes over and stands over me and picks me up by the front of my shirt and lifts me off the sidewalk and goes into his flashback. And he goes, don't you fucking die on me, man. And he just starts smacking me back and forth. Now, that kind of woke me up. And I said, you know, please, you're hurting me. And then the ambulance pulled up right away from the hospital. Happened to be another lucky thing about 6 blocks away. So the ambulance was there in literally 3 or 4 minutes. And I'll never forget, the ambulance driver was this tall, slender black guy. He got out, and he was kind of silhouetted in the street light. And he had short little dreads, like 2 inches long. And he was looking down at me. And he stuck a needle in my neck. I guess it was adrenaline. And he says, grabs me by the chin, he says, this is going to hurt. I'm like, I don't know what it is about this block, but everybody is hurting me tonight. And he takes the scissors and starts to cut my clothing off my torso. And I remembered I had a really nice cashmere sweater. So I said, do you have to cut the sweater? And he stopped, and he turned back to his partner, and he goes, why do they always say that? And at that moment, I had a little feeling of hope, because it seemed like he'd done this before and he knew what he was doing. And at the moment, I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My lungs were filling up. He exposes my torso. He takes a knife and just cuts between my ribs and shoves a tube in, which hurt worse than anything I'd ever felt. I come up off the sidewalk. He pushed me down and goes, we got to do the other side. We did the other side, and the blood started to drain, and I began to feel like I could breathe again. They put me into the ambulance. Like I said, the hospital was very close. We got there. They were waiting for us. And I remember as we're wheeling, they're running with me down the corridor, and the lights are just going like that. We get into the operating room, and one of the side effects of such massive blood loss is that you have tunnel vision. So I just remember having everything was black with 2 little coin-sized portals, and I was turning my head to try and see what was going on. And an interesting aspect of those kind of memories is they kind of go to a vault somewhere in your brain that's, I mean, George Lucas did the sound effects and it's in high def. And those memories are stored and you don't access them very often. But when you do, they come back with this force that is, it's kind of shocking with, you know, even now, just to know that I'm remembering that and to have that feeling that life was ebbing. And I looked up and I said, is there anything I can do to help? And the nurse, I remember, had this kind of hysterical laugh. And there was nothing. So I looked over on the side, they were clamping the mask on me. And another quality of those memories is I had these thoughts that they didn't have words. It was just like a cloud of descriptions. It's hard to describe, but it's as if the first thought I had was that I remembered being back in college and raising money, but it wasn't like it wasn't a linear process of thinking sequentially. It was just like a cloud of the entire experience simultaneously. And I remembered raising money for the flood victims of Bangladesh. And my dorm had contributed, and we'd done work, and we'd heard these horrible stories about the floods. And then my anesthesiologist looked Bangladeshi. And I just had these two thoughts, and I thought, maybe something will work out there somehow. And then I remember they're yelling, everyone's saying, you know, it's no blood pressure, he has a pulse. And the surgeon just said, we don't have time to wait for the anesthetic. So they just put the knife in and went. And then I fainted, so that was over. And then I woke up with my homicide detectives and my surgeon. And it turns out that the guy that I knocked out had been caught because the police were there very quickly and his buddies had abandoned him on the street corner. And they told him that I died because the surgeon, when he finished sewing me up, had said the guy has about a 2% chance of living. And the NYPD's efficiency, they didn't want to change the paperwork, so they just gave it all to homicide. And so I have these detectives, they want me to ID the mugshots before I die. And I felt that I didn't understand that I was supposed to die, but I said that I was on the morphine and I was in too much pain. I said, I really can't, you know, these pictures don't, I can't tie it to the guys from last night, I'm sorry. And then one of the detectives looks at me and says, buddy, I've been on the force 17 years. I never seen anybody get hit with the kind of knives you got hit with and live. What do you eat? And I think I should have said Guinness, but they found the knives on the subway platform, and you know, my blood is on the knife, my blood is on the kids. They're all caught. They had 5, you know, and they're all you know, kind of the case is just ironclad. And I'm on life support in the surgical ICU, and they just kept waiting for one of 2 things, for me to die or poop. And apparently once you poop, then you're across some very definitive line. They had removed about 1/3 of my intestines, you know, organs that I didn't know that I had. And so then the 3rd day, I got taken out of surgical ICU and put into the other room on the not gonna die list. And then the nurse came in with a clipboard to talk to me about my insurance. And being self-employed at the time, I was insurance free. And she was not very happy to hear that. And so the next morning, came in and said that it's amazing how good you look, and we really think you ought to continue to get better at home. We have a cane, and we're going to pull the morphine and give you a bottle of Percocet, and good luck. So the surgeon came in, and he came in with about 4 of his friends. And he whips the blanket off of me, and it was like that. And all of his colleagues come and look, there's no infection anywhere. And they're probing me and looking at me, and they're muttering amongst themselves, and like I'm a restored automobile, you know, that he's just done this great job on. And he's just, you know, he's so proud of the fact that I'm still here. And, you know, I was pretty happy too. But it was just interesting that he took me as an example of his work, you know, to show his buddies. And then, you know, my mom was there, and she lives out in Wyoming. We go back to my apartment, and she says, you know, you should come back to Wyoming to get better. And, you know, this city's terrible. Just come back. And so I thought I could use a break. And so I went, we flew back to Wyoming. And my brothers and sisters, I have 2 brothers and a sister, and they couldn't believe what had just happened to me. And they wanted me to explain it because they had just heard, you know, it was such an incredible story that they wanted to hear from me. And I was so happy to be alive, I said, well, why don't we all get in the car and we'll drive out into the mountains and we'll find a hill and we'll make a big fire, and I'll just, you know, look up at the stars, and I'll just tell you the whole thing of this incredible thing that happened to me. So we all agreed, but my sister said, you know, I've got to work in the morning, so you guys are going to be up all night. I'm going to take my car, so we'll have 2 cars. So she's with one brother in the front car, in her car, and I'm with my other brother in his car, which is a 1966 GTO, which is a muscle car. You know, it's very fast, it's an iconic American machine. And we're heading out into the prairie at dusk to find a mountaintop for me to tell this story. And my brother is looking at me, and I look pretty terrible. I lost about 40 pounds in the hospital, you know, including the intestines that they took out. And he just starts to cry after a while. And he just keeps looking over at me. He's like, I can't believe that would be some kind of test of manhood or some like an unarmed man. Like, well, how is that possible? And he's just looking at me, and he's just overcome by the fact, you know, of how bad I look. And it's kind of another indication how when you're under stress, you make not very good decisions. And earlier, when we got in the car, I went to put on a seatbelt, but I had so many surgery and stabbing wounds that it was too uncomfortable, so I didn't put it on. As we come over the hill, my sister has stopped on the road because there's a herd of deer, and my brother is looking at me. We hit the back of her car doing 65 miles an hour, tore the back end off of her car. I hit my face on the dashboard and went through the windshield, however far down the road you go when you're moving at 60 miles an hour, and rolled and tumbled and came to thinking that I was dead again. And I just hurt so badly that I couldn't imagine that if you're dead that there's this kind of pain in a disembodied venue. And yet I could smell the burning rubber, and I could hear the hissing of the radiators. And I looked, and my siblings are all running toward me, screaming. They're all okay because they were wearing seatbelts, but the 2 cars one car's in the ditch, the headlights are shining at crazy angles, and we're laying there in the middle of the Wyoming wilderness. There's no cell phone, there's no people, there's no gas station. And I've taken a pretty, you know, my face, I have road rash from skidding to the stop, and everybody is screaming and crying, and we just wait. And the next car that comes is a pickup truck, and he's got a CB radio. He calls the highway patrol. Highway patrolman shows up. Now there's 2 cars that are completely destroyed. He says, I need everybody's ID. And I'm there. I just have giant flaps of skin hanging off. My nose is broken. My lips, my teeth are broken. I'm just, my face looks like hamburger. And everybody gives him the ID, and he goes, you all have the same last name. I'm not going to write any tickets tonight. You can sort it out when you get home. Let's get this guy to the hospital. So they put me in the back of the pickup truck and head into Cheyenne to the emergency room. Now, Cheyenne is a little town, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So the only thing they really have at night in the way of emergencies is people in car accidents. And so there we go. We pull up, and the woman at the desk looks at me, and she goes, weren't wearing your seatbelt, were you? And I just say, look, can you just stitch my face up and let me get out of here? So she brings me in and sits me up on the table, takes my shirt off. Now I have hundreds of stitches, multiple stab wounds, fresh string sticking out everywhere. And she just looks at me and goes, honey, what happened to you? And I just said, just please stitch up my face and let me get out of here. And I took the next flight back to New York City. And so then I'm in my apartment, and I'm having a very hard time. I can't sleep. I can't lay on my back because of the stab wounds. I can't lay on either side because of the chest tube wounds. I can't lay on my stomach. I can't eat with the broken teeth and the missing intestines. Everything is in pain. And I have nightmares that you would not believe. I can't go to sleep, and I'm just there. And the district attorney is calling me to see if I can help with the cases to put these 5 guys in prison. And I'm like, I really don't have the energy. And he said, listen, if you don't come and help me, these young kids, they're 17, 18 years old, all of them. They're going to show up in court, and they're going to look young and small and vulnerable. And I want the jury and the judge to see what they did, and for you to be the victim, and not have people feel sorry for them, but you need to be there. And I thought to myself, you know, I think what I'm going to do is I'll show up and I'll kill them. I'll just jump over the little railing and I'll kill them. And then I find out that everybody gets their own trial. So if I kill one, then I'll be in jail and those guys won't get killed, so I have to scratch that plan. But I'm trying to wrestle with this incredible pain, and I didn't know what post-traumatic stress was. It would have been nice, you know, on my way out of the hospital if they'd given me a little card that said, you're going to have these intrusive thoughts, you're going to have a lot of pain, you're going to have nightmares. It doesn't mean you're losing your mind. That's just something that happens. So, you know, get help for that. But don't think that you're going crazy, because that's how it felt. And I would go to the DA and have these appointments with him, and I just could no longer function. Like my job, I had a little business making custom furniture. My van was towed while I was in the hospital. My landlord padlocked my shop because I couldn't pay the rent. And then I was behind on my apartment. And so over the months, I ended up just losing everything. And my family said, we're not going to give you money to stay in New York. Come back to Wyoming, and we'll help you. Which really pissed me off, because I just wanted to help. I didn't want them to have strings attached to it. And so I said, you know what, I'm just going to be here. And I came home one day to find that the marshals had evicted me, and all my belongings were in black plastic bags on the sidewalk, and the homeless people were picking through them and taking stuff. And I have to say, there's nothing that feels quite like New York doesn't want you, like having your stuff being taken by homeless guys on the street. And I went to the DA's office, and I tried to be macho, I guess, and not let on to him how much I was hurting and how many things were going wrong. And at this day, I just broke down, and I started to cry, and I was like, I'm homeless now, and I don't know, my business is shuttered and gone. And he gave me a number for victims assistance people. A little late, I thought. And I walked over there. The woman who came out to help me, I didn't have an appointment or anything. I just walked. She was a very attractive young blonde woman. She looked like the actress Reese Witherspoon, and Legally Blonde with the ponytail and the turtleneck and the clipboard. And she's like, "Come on in, we'll help you out." And I was in a very dark place in my head, and I just had no confidence that she was going to be able to help me. And I just looked at her, and we walked back to her desk. And when we got to her desk, I knew we were not going to connect, because pinned to the wall of her cubicle next to her monitor was the little poster, you might know it, of the kitten and the branch saying, "Hang in there, baby," underneath it. And I just felt that this was not going to work for me. She was not going to understand where I was coming from. So she gave me an address for free group counseling sessions up in the Bronx. She gave me paperwork to fill out to get on a list for subsidized housing. She said the list is an 18-month wait, but at least you'll be on the list. Paperwork for Medicare, so I could get my expenses taken care of. And I just looked at her with these envelopes and the paperwork, and I felt like I was a drowning man who had been thrown a kit to build a boat. And I just gathered up my envelopes, and I walked out, and I went to my favorite bartender. She was this very beautiful Lebanese Canadian. She was a poet and a writer and a bartender, and she would listen to me, which was great. She had this Simone de Beauvoir thing going on. She smoked like it was a part-time job. She just was really great. She had a great ear, and poured a good drink and would just listen, which was very unusual, because most of the time when I tried to talk and go through what was happening in my head, very well-meaning people had kind of stock responses, one of three responses usually. And the first one, which as a bit of advice, don't ever do this to people who are suffering, is to say, everything happens for a reason. It just made me want to punch them in the face and ask them if they knew what the reason for that was. The second thing that people say, again, all very well-meaning but not very useful, is pull yourself together, man. You're alive. You are, you've got everything in front of you. Just carry on. Buck up, man. Just put it behind you and keep going. And that made me want to stab them 6 times and then get back in touch with them in 6 or 8 months and say, "So, how's it going? You able to put it all behind you and then move on? Because I really need to hear from somebody who knows what I'm going through, who's not just telling me what to do." And then the third thing, which was also very hard to hear, was whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And this was hardest to hear because I went to college, right? I read Nietzsche. I was up all night in the student union drinking coffee and thinking how cool that was, Whatever doesn't kill you, man, just makes you stronger. But from my vantage point, I felt like life could actually break you. Like there were things that could happen to you that would put you in a position where you would not ever be stronger, where you would lose, like things would slip so badly that you would not ever even be as good as you were, much less stronger. That the rest of your life would be trying to catch up, and that you would just be broken. And that this idea that somehow if you lived through it, you'd be better. From where I was looking, I just saw all the things that I felt like I would never have again. Peace of mind, or the sense that you could walk down the street. And my post-traumatic stress was making it so difficult to ride the subway. Anytime I saw a couple of teenagers with any hint of menace, which is every teenager in New York, I would have, my heart would start to pound, and I would try and calm myself down in my head by saying, this isn't, we're on a subway, it's the middle of the day, these kids aren't going to kill you. And then somewhere, like from my reptilian cortex would come the signal, like, yeah, the last time you were thinking that, we almost died, and we're the ones, we kept you here. So we're not going to listen to you now, and the heart rate is going, the pulse is pounding, the vision gets extremely acute, and I'm ready to fight again and again and again, day in and day out. And it just would wear me out. And then there would be days where I'd be walking down the street and I'd pass by the corner deli, and the buckets of flowers. I was so happy to be alive. I had this chance to live. And I'd look at the flowers and it'd be like something out of a Disney animation from Fantasia. The flowers would just start to sing. And it was like I was being overwhelmed by existence, like being. And every smell and sound was just, it was so potent. And yet, the rest of my life was shit, everything was disintegrating. And my girlfriend, my bartender, who had let me move in with her, was getting worried because I'd gone from being this sad guy to being this mad guy. I was just resenting everything. I would take my little bag of tools to go look for work. I'd go up to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where there's always some rich guy renovating his mansion. And if you walk up to a job site and you got a bag of tools, English is your first language, you know your way around a job site, the foreman will give you a job. So he's like, yeah, put the new guy on the baseboard, and I'd be working, and I was a good carpenter, so then I'd move up, and then a few weeks later they'd say, okay, put him in the library on the rosewood door. So I'd be in there mortising an offset pivot hinge into this beautiful rosewood door. And I'd look at the craftsmanship and the skilled workers and just the beautiful materials, and I would think of how lucky these people were to have this, and this was going to be their life. And it contrasted with my existence at the time, and yet appreciative of the fact that I had this job. And I would just curl up on the floor and start to cry. And, one of the Guatemalan laborers looks in the library, he goes to the foreman, he's like, that guy you hired, he's crying in the basement. The foreman would come down and he'd be like, Eddie, here's some money to pay you for the day, go get a drink, man, we can't use you anymore. So I'd be fired. And this would happen again and again. I'd be in a meeting and there'd be a problem, and I'd want to say, no, but we're all alive. Don't you realize, like, we're a little late, but for God's sake, we're alive. And I'd start to cry. He'd be like, who brought him to the meeting? And I'd get fired. And so one day I'm fired again, and I'm sitting on this park bench along Central Park, and I see some guy walking very purposefully. He's got his attaché case and his perfect haircut and his Hermes tie and his nice suit. And I watch him walk by, and I just want to tackle him and kneel on his chest and just punch him in the face and say, man, you think you're so good. You think you've got it all figured out. Your abilities and how you act and everything is keeping you where you are. But you're just lucky. In one day, everything you think about, everything you think you know can be gone in one day, and you'll have no recourse. How come you don't realize that? I want you to know that that's possible. I don't want you to be so smug. I didn't do that. I let him keep going. But as I watched him walk, I was hit with this realization that I was just willing to hurt a perfect stranger to make a point about what was wrong with my life. And in that moment, I realized that I had now become closer to the men who stabbed me than I was to the me that I had known my whole life. And that was a horrible thought. It was where I felt like I had been broken and that there was only this road to hell, and I would be alone because nobody would want to be with somebody like that. And I rejected it. My first thought was like, I know, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not going to be the guy who lives that way. And the next thought was that for the first time I realized I had been fighting to get my life back. Otherwise they would have won. I needed to get everything back. And that next thought I had was, I won't get it back. That guy is gone. That business, that person, I'm different than I ever was. Some things I will never do again. Some things I will always do from now on. But I'm not who I was. And so I cannot get back. And then there was a sense of like lightness, of like, well, what do I have? Let's take stock. My health is, in jeopardy, but I have my strength. I have this great girl. I can start from scratch. Yes. So I run back home to her. And I'm like, guess what? I figured it all out. I'm going to be better from now on. I know what I'm going to try and do. Will you marry me? She says, no. You got a lot more work to do. So she was right, but she also knew that I was never going to ask her again. So after another year and a half or so, she asked me to marry her. And then, after working on that for a while, we decided to do the most audacious thing possible, given what I felt about the world, and have a kid. So we ended up with a daughter, and I put on her shoes when I head out to work. And then I hear bing bong, and I'm back on the subway. And my stop is the next stop. And I see these kids working on these laces. And I want to pull up my shirt and go, here's what the stitches can do up here. And I think, no, it's the New York City subway. That's not going to go down very well. And I just think, I'm going to let them go. I'll just they'll carry on, go to their lecture with their guy. And the next stop comes, I get off. And I'm just standing on the subway platform. And just people rushing by and the train's going, and I just have this like, I was on my way to a meeting, and I'm standing there, and I just put my finger inside my shirt, and I feel my middle finger go into the first scar that I ever got, my belly button from my umbilical cord. And then around that traces the last scar that I got from my surgeon. And I think that random encounter with those kids led me to this random encounter with my surgical team and the nurses in the ICU. And their skill and their training and their abilities combined with my strength and, as in any success story, a tremendous amount of luck. Together, we pushed back against chaos. And I get to be here today.